Today we're playing Buzz Lightyear's favorite new Modern deck with the help of some of his friends to get the job done. Today we're going undefeated with Modern's newest creature combo brew, Lonus Samwise Combo, a deck that can go infinite in 5 different ways. The most basic combo in today's deck utilizes Samwise, Cauldron Familiar, and Viscera Seer to drain and gain for infinite life. But Lonus does its best Samwise impression when Academy Manufacturer is in play, able to facilitate the same exact combo. But that's not all, because if you don't have a Viscera Seer, that's okay too, because Chatterfang Squirrel General can also target your cat with its activated ability, which goes infinite. And if that's still not good enough, Double Sam and Double Manufacturer can generate infinite mana and infinite clues utilizing Sam's activated ability, which is good enough to get the kill as well. There's more, but I'd rather just show you how it's done in our first match. Let's get that trophy. I am very much looking forward to this one. We're jumping in on the play. Opening 7, we can't keep this one. Mulligan down to 6 cards. 6 card hand. A little sketchy, but really powerful. I'm actually going to keep this and we'll get rid of a Cauldron Familiar. We're going to kick things off. Overgrown Tomb. We'll shock that into a Gilded Goose. Make ourselves a food. Pass the turn. Opponent with a Prismatic Vista and nothing else. Draw into a second Collected Company. We'll sacrifice our food, play out our Samwise. Opponent's going to fetch in response to my Samwise, gets themselves a basic swamp, and they cycle Lauren Revealed in response. Get themselves a Watery Grave. We don't have a land drop, so we'll just pass the turn back. Opponent with a Prismatic Vista, they fetch, basic island, nothing else. Alright, we have our full combo here. We're going to play out our Cauldron Familiar to start with. It's going to trigger Samwise. My opponent responds with a Bowmasters. I think they're just going to lose here. They target the Familiar. Familiar dies. We still get the trigger. And now we're going to add a black mana. We'll cast out our Viscera Seer. It's going to trigger. And we can bring our Familiar back. Sacrifice a food. Samwise will trigger. Familiar will trigger. Sacrifice the Familiar to the Viscera Seer. Look at our top card. We'll put it on top. And we're going to do this 16 more times until our opponent is dead. And they scoop. Opening 7 looks acceptable. We'll keep it. Opponent with Watery Grave tapped. Back to us. Drew a Chatterfang. We're going to lead off on our Halfling. We'll pass turn. Hall of the Storm Giants and a Collective Brutality. Delighted Halfling hits the bin. Drawn to a Court of Calling. Not really what we're looking for here. We'll play out our Saga. Trigger. Into a Soul Guide Lantern. And we'll eat the card out of their graveyard. Opponent with a Prismatic Vista. Nothing else. Alright, Polar Land, which is excellent. Saga goes up to 2. Play out a Forest. And we'll pass the turn. Opponent fetches end of turn, gets a basic island. Cast a Sauron's Ransom, and we're going to give them the option of a land and a removal spell or a land and a damnation. We'll take the land and the damnation. Play out Attack Enuma into a 1-ring. If you've been paying attention to Modern at all, you should be familiar with the play patterns of what happens when there is an unanswered 1-ring. My opponent sticks their 1-ring, eventually finds a Shieldred, and things just get out of control to the point where there is 0 chance of me coming back. Let's move on to game 3. We'll take the play. Can't keep the 7. We'll mulligan. 6 is a little sketchy, but better. We'll keep it. And I think I'm actually going to get rid of Chatterfang here. Opponent's on a mold of 6 as well. We'll start with our Verdant Catacombs and we'll pass the turn. Opponent with a Hall of the Storm Giants. We're going to fetch end of turn. Get our Temple Garden tapped. Untap. Drew into a Familiar. Not bad. We'll play out our Samwise. Pass the turn. Basic island from our opponent. Back our way. Drew a Manufacturer. Unfortunately, we can't cast any of this stuff. Attack for 2. Stuck on 2 lands again. Pass the turn. A pretty anemic start from both myself and my opponent. Let's fast forward to the point it gets a little bit more exciting. Found their Black Source. Fatal Push the Samwise. Back our way. Drew into a Court of Calling, which is really good. I'm going to start with Samwise. Trigger. Make a clue. 1 mana short of just winning the game here. We'll attack for 2. We'll pass turn back. Opponent with 4 mana, 1 ring. We're going to respond, get a Viscera Seer, and they don't want to play anymore. They scooped it up. On to match 2. And in match 2, we get paired against the most popular deck in the format, Scam, which is the bane of my creature combo loving soul. Despite having a decent opening hand, our opponent was able to whittle our life total with Daughty Voidwalkers and slowly chipped away at our resources. We stuck an Academy Manufacturer while at 3 life, but the board was just too wide and we weren't able to claw our way back in. It was a long game, it was hard fought, but let's see if we can get him back in game 2. My opponent keeps a 7. I think we have to keep this, even though it is slow. Bloodstained Mire, a fetch, Blood Crypt, Shock, Grief, discarding a Voidwalker. They take the Endurance, Undying Malice, Grief is going to come back, Fun and Interactive Magic, Samwise down. Drew into a Manufacturer, can't cast that, we'll lead on our Temple Garden tapped, pass the turn. Take a hit for 4, we'll go down to 16. Back to us. Drew into a Cauldron Familiar, we'll shock out this Overgrown Tomb, play out the Familiar, drain 1 and gain 1. Opponent attacks for 4, we're going to go down to 11. No second land. Draw for turn. Drew Witch's Oven, which is actually really good. We're going to play out our basic Forest, and I'm going to cast my Witch's Oven now. And we'll attack for 1. Opponent's down to 15. They untap. Attack for 4. Alright, no second land. We're in business. Untap. Drew a Misty. We're going to lead on our Manufacturer into our Gingerbread Cabin. It's going to trigger. From there, sacrifice our treasure, cast out our Lonis, and we'll attack with the Cauldron Familiar. Back the other way. Opponent casts a Fury, discarding a Blood Moon. Stack their triggers incorrectly. They're not going to get punished for it though, I don't believe. So the Feigned Death happens. Fury's going to come back. Okay, so we're going to Witch's Oven, sacrifice our Familiar. We're going to sacrifice a food. We're going to bring our Familiar back. It's going to trigger Lonis, trigger our Familiar, and then our creatures are going to die. Grief's going to hit for 4. That'll put us down to 4 life. Untap, draw. We drew an Endurance. Not great, not terrible. Start with an attack for 1. Opponent's down to 12. Witch's Oven. Well, let's crack a clue. Probably should have done this first. Another Endurance. Play out a Misty. And I think we can actually do everything we want to do on their turn. So we'll pass turn back. Opponent with their second land. They fetch. Hopefully this is not a Voidwalker, but it likely is. Get a basic Swamp. Opponent starts with some attacks. We're going to start by bringing back the Familiar. Put ourselves out of bolt range. We're going to fetch down to 4. Get ourselves a Dryad Arbor. Cast an Endurance. We're not going to shuffle anything. Double block Grief. Block the Fury. This doesn't accomplish anything. I'm not sure why my opponent's doing this. Grief's still going to die. End of turn, we'll return the Familiar. Untap. Alright, we are in business. We'll attack for 1. Pass the turn. As opposed to other creature combo decks, having access to Collected Company means this build can claw back from seemingly unwinnable positions. We cast our Coco and hit a Manufacturer and a Goose. Familiar, bring it back into play. Back to our turn. Okay, we drew into a land. I think we're going to start by cracking a clue. And we drew into a Sam, which is really good. Cast out the Sam, play out the Verdant Catacombs. I think we're just going to pass for the moment. Blood Crypt from my opponent. They go down to 3 life. A Voidwalker. Okay, so we got to make a move now here. We're going to sacrifice the Familiar or return the Familiar. Samwise is going to make a bunch of tokens. Familiar is going to drain and gain. And now the Voidwalker will enter play. Opponent moves to combat. I'm going to respond to this. I'm going to fetch. Make it a basic. I'm going to flash an Endurance. It's going to trigger Samwise. Endurance, I'm not going to target anything. And from here, I'm going to block with the Familiar. Let that happen. Familiar's gone. I'm going to use Samwise to return the Lonis. End of turn. I'll untap. We drew into a Soulguide Lantern. Use a treasure and a green. Cast the Lonis. Trigger Sam. Opponent terminates the Lonis. Sure. Draw a card off of a clue. Drew into a Halfling. Having access to Salmon Manufacturer means 1-drops can be played out essentially for free, netting an extra clue and a food each time they hit the board. Opponent attacks with a Voidwalker. Go down to 4 life. Untap. Draw into a Coco. We're just going to cast that out now. Running low on time here. We'll get a Chatterfang and a Lonis. And this should be enough to win here. Okay. We're going to Chatterfang down the Fury. Chatterfang down the Elemental. Move to combat. Swing for 4. Okay, Bowmasters is not going to be good enough. So Bowmasters is going to enter play. Target me for 1. Sure. 4 blocks will kill the Bowmaster. 4 blocks will kill the Orc army. And we'll yield. Alright, and after about 3 minutes of waiting, we've won the game. On to round 3, paired against Living End. And as I often do in my videos when playing against Living End, we're going to fast forward through this first game because my opponent played 3 lands and cast a Shardless Agent, and then I scooped. Nothing exciting, nothing to see here. Alright, let's try this again. We'll be on the play. Opening 7, we do not have any of our sideboard cards here. I think we're going to mulligan down to 6. And our 6 has a bunch of sideboard cards, but is lacking lands, but I think we keep this and bottom a Samwise. Start with a Verdant and a Chalice, and we'll pass the turn. Opponent leads Breeding Pool, shock it in, nothing else. Back to our turn. Drew a Manufacturer, we don't have a second land, so we have to pass the turn. Opponent cycles a Striped Riverwinder, back their way. Misty Rainforest, back to us. We found our second land, which is great. Play out our Verdant. We're gonna get a Temple Garden. We'll pay 2 life, and we'll get our Breeding Pool, cast out Lavinia. Lavinia resolves. Oftentimes Cascade decks can answer 1 sideboard card, but having 2 in play that are different card types makes it almost impossible for my opponent to execute their game plan in a timely manner. They're forced to go on the beatdown plan, which works for a little while, but hits a roadblock after they get me down to 4 life. Alright, this is the turn we go crazy. Drew into a Haywire Might. 3 mana, we're going to cast our Chatterfang. Chatterfang resolves. There's going to be a bunch of triggers. Alright, we have 6 squirrels and a bunch of other stuff going on. Sacrifice a treasure, we'll cast a Haywire Might. More triggers, more squirrels. Alright, we have 12 squirrels. We're going to sacrifice 4 squirrels, kill the Curator. 2 squirrels, we'll kill the Shardless. We'll attack for 6. Opponent's going to go down to 7. 2 mana, we're going to cast another Samwise. We'll keep the new one. Bunch more triggers. Alright, so we're back up to 12 squirrels. Sacrifice a treasure. We'll cast a Soul Guide Lantern. Exile the Curator from our opponent's graveyard. Alright, our opponent scoops. Reasonable. Despite an early punt in Game 3, I was able to stabilize the board with a Lonis and Manufacturer at 5 life. I drew into Cauldron Familiar, which kept me afloat until drawing into a Chatterfang. Having access to Lonis, Manufacturer, Chatterfang, and Familiar is actually a combo kill. You activate Chatterfang, sacrifice a squirrel, kill the cat, and then return it, sacrificing a food, and then can repeat the process. Because this was my first time playing the deck, I didn't see the line, but fortunately I wasn't punished and still pulled through despite my blunder. We're 3-0. Alright, opening 7 is really fragile but has a lot of potential. I think we're actually going to keep this. Opponent's on a mulligan to 5. Scalding Tarn, fetch. Steam Vents, shock, Monastery Swiftspear. Looking like prowess. We're down to 19. Drew into a Collected Company, not great. We're going to shock, play out our Halfling, and we'll pass the turn. Opponent untaps, 4 cards in hand. Sulfur Falls, no attack, interesting. Back our way. Alright, we drew into a Windswept Heath, pretty good. We're going to fetch with the Heath, get ourselves a basic Forest, cast an uncounterable Chatterfang. A lot of text on that squirrel. Back the other way. No attack from my opponent. Alright, and we draw into a Beseiju here, which is really good. So we're very close to just winning the game. We're going to play out our Cauldron Familiar, trigger, and our Halfling. My opponent counterspells the Halfling. Very interesting. We'll just pass back. Alright, opponent scoops the game. Game 2, my opponent catches me off guard with a very unusual build of blue-red prowess with the inclusion of a Shadow Spear in their deck. They wind up suiting up a big Sprite Dragon and swing in for lethal. We're moving on to Game 3. Opening 7 looks good, we'll keep it. Opponent's on a 7-card hand. Start with the Verdant Catacombs. We'll fetch, basic Forest, into a Halfling, pass the turn. Scalding Tarn from my opponent, fetch, shock into Steam Vents, and a DRC. We'll untap. Drew into a Samwise, actually really good. Cast out the Samwise, shock in a Tomb, play out the Goose, 2 triggers, pass the turn. This deck having the ability to produce an abundance of food at a moment's notice gives it a greater chance to recover against hyper-aggressive strategies like Prowess, as you can always crack the food for life when needed. Opponent casts a Spreading Seas on my Dryad Arbor. Wasn't expecting that one. Keep cards on top. Mishra's Bauble. Okay, put an island into the graveyard. Look at the top card. No attacks. Untap. They draw. Alright, we drew into a Manufacturer, which is probably one of our best draws from this point. While Sam and Lonis get the party started, Manufacturer helps to kick things up a notch and snowballs out of control very quickly. Opponent responds with a lightning bolt on my Manufacturer. We're going to activate our Goose. We're going to make a food. Dragon's Rage triggers some more. Kill our Manufacturer. Lonis is going to trigger. Take a Spreading Seas. And we'll Spreading Seas this Sulfur Falls. I'll draw a card. Fatal Push, not a bad one. With Delirium online and my Fatal Push being met by a counterspell, Double Darcies start to apply pressure to my life total over the next few turns, dropping me to a meager 7 life. Lightning Bolt targeting me. Go down to 4 life. When it attacks with the team, we're in Witch's Oven, sacrifice the Familiar, return the Familiar, gain a life, block the Swift Spear. 4 damage will sacrifice a food, 4 damage will sacrifice another food. Familiar dies, go down to 5 life. End of turn, we're going to return the Familiar. We're going to leave this fetch land up. Untap. Alright, draw into a Soul Guide Lantern, actually really good. Play it out. We're going to exile the Lightning Bolt from my opponent's graveyard. We're not going to attack, we're just going to pass turn back. Opponent casts a Lava Spike, puts us down to 3 life. Attack with the team. Soul Guide will exile their graveyard. Move to blocks. Block a Dragon's Rage, Snapcaster. Like that. 4 damage will eat a food. We're up to 6 life. Take 2. End of turn. Sacrifice a food. Return the Familiar. Sacrifice the Familiar. We'll make a food. We'll do it again. And fetch down to 5. Get ourselves another basic. We'll make a food with the Goose. Untap. Draw another Goose. Not bad. Play it out. Combat. Attack for 2. Back the other way. Opponent casts a Lava Spike. Puts us down to 2 life. No attacks, and they scoop it up. 4-0. And here we go. On the draw for the 5-0, opening 7 is very solid. We're going to keep this. Opponent with a Power Plant into a Chromatic Star. We drew into a Lonis. We're going to play our Catacombs. We'll fetch. Shocking Overgrown Tomb. Play out our Goose. Pass turn back. Opponent cracks their Star. Ancient Stirrings. Find an Expedition map. Second Power Plant into a map. Really good for us. We draw into a Manufacturer. So we're going to play out our Verdant. Fetch. Oh, that was a mistake. I think we'll still be okay here. We're going to get ourselves Viscerous here into play. Cauldron Familiar into play. And the Witch's Oven into play. Pass turn back. 2 mana from my opponent. They crack the map. Find themselves a Tower. Tower into play. Another map. And looks like we should have game 1 here. Untap. Drew into a Saga. We'll play that out. For 5 mana, get ourselves a Samwise with our Court of Calling and our opponent scoops. 7 card hand. I don't think we can keep this, unfortunately. Our 6 is better. We will keep this. I think we get rid of one of the lands. Opponent with a Mine into a Star. They're on a 6 card hand. Drew into a Chatterfang. We're going to start with a Windswept Heath. We'll fetch. I think we're getting an Overgrown Tomb into a Halfling. Pass turn. They crack their Star into a Besage, into a Scrying. Alright, we like that. They find a Tower. Untap. We drew into a Misty. I think we're going to get our Saga online into the Manufacturer. Pass turn back. Opponent plays out the Tower into a map. Leave it at that. Back our way. Drew into a Pithing Needle, which is what I was planning on getting off the Saga. We'll change things a little bit here, though. We're going to play out the Misty into the Chatterfang. Opponent cracks their map now, finds the Power Plant. Crack for 1, and we will be setting a stop during their draw step. We're going to fetch for a white source now to my opponent's turn. 1 mana, we'll Besage you down the Mine. They play out the Power Plant into a Sphere, 4 cards in hand. Crack the Sphere, add a green into a Relic, a second Relic. Activate a Relic, we'll exile a card. Alright, our go. Religus. They'll take one of our lands. Besage stays in the graveyard. Draw Farce for turn. We're going to add a mana. From here, I think we get the Witch's Oven. Play out a land. And then we're going to Coco. I believe that's just game. We're going to take Samwise and Cauldron Familiar. We'll drain 1 and gain 1, and we'll also make 3 tokens. Okay, so Manufacturer is going to do its thing. Chatterfang is going to do its thing. 3 squirrels. We're going to attack for 4. Opponent's down to 14. We'll cast out a Pithing Needle. Opponent cracks one of their relics. Needle comes into play. We'll name Ugin the Spirit Dragon. And now we should just have the win here. Witch's Oven. Sacrifice the familiar. Make a bajillion tokens. Familiar. Sacrifice a food. Return it to play. Make a bunch of tokens. Alright, and now we can activate Chatterfang, target the familiar, sacrifice a treasure, sacrifice a squirrel, kill the familiar, do it again, sacrifice a food, return it, 3 more tokens, and this is a loop. A very apropos finish to our league. I see the line and am able to kill using the combo that I missed a few matches earlier. We finished with an impressive, undefeated 5-0 record with one of the most fun decks I have ever played. I want to thank you for tuning in and sticking around until the end. I will see you again very soon. You know the deal, my friend. Be well.